But let's make Gaston the protagonist and suppose he overthrows the beast. They break all the magic furniture and Belle's family flees because they're cowards. What next? Does Gaston live in the castle and become a great king? We already know he is the egg industry. One thing though, he's got to stop discharging his firearms indoors and within city limits.
Spin syllables, soliloquies so simple as these.
It's Reckin' and Rappin', a podcast with a purpose. I'm King Cooper here, alone in the booth. What's the difference between rap and a podcast? Both are just words. First, we'll discuss who has better depth of character, protagonist or antagonist. We were talking about the Ben liking bad guys, and he clarified it was liking characters with depth. I think the depth of character in good guys comes from their struggle to be good in a world trying to corrupt them. They are no one because the story is trying to speak to everyone and offer life advice. It is through the story that a protagonist is discovering their own character. But let's make Gaston the protagonist and suppose he overthrows the beast. They break all the magic furniture and Belle's family flees because they're cowards. What next? Does Gaston live in the castle and become a great king? We already know he is the egg industry. One thing though, he's got to stop discharging his firearms indoors and within city limits. Let's move on to Shakespeare's Pericles. I'll be reading the prologue. This is Gower. To sing a song that old was sung, from ashes ancient Gower is come, assuming man's infirmities, to glad your ear and please your eyes. It hath been sung at festivals, on ember eves and holy ales, and lords and ladies in their lives have read it for restoratives. The purchase is to make men glorious, a bonum que anticius eo milius. If you, born in these latter times, when wit more ripe, accept my rhymes, and that to hear an old man sing may to your wishes pleasure bring. I life would wish, and that I might waste it for you like taper light. This Antioch, then Antiochus the Great built up, this city for his chiefest seat, the fairest in all Syria, I tell you, what mine authors say. This king unto him took a fair, who died and left a female heir, so buxom, so blithe, and full of face, as heaven had lent her all his grace, with whom the father liking took, and her to incest did provoke. Bad child, worse father, to entice his own to evil should be done by none. What custom they did begin was with long use account no sin. The beauty of this sinful dame made many princes thither frame, to seek her as a bedfellow, in marriage pleasures playfellow, which to prevent he made a law, to keep her still and men in awe, that whoso asked her for his wife, his riddle told not, lost his life. So for her many a wit did die, as yon grim looks do testify. What now ensues to the judgment your eye, I give my cause, who lest can justify. And the Latin part in the beginning of that means, and the older a good thing, the better. Some lines to cover. One, it said, the king unto him took a fair, that's French for brother, who died and left a female heir. Next line, so buxom, so blithe, and full of face, as heaven had lent her all his grace. And the words buxom and blithe are probably new to you, unless you already know the definitions. Quick, the Ben, look them up. The Ben is not here. The next line, that whoso asked her for his wife, his riddle told not, lost his life. I just liked that last bit. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a comment. I'd love for you to join in the conversation. Next up, this week's rap comes from DMX. R.I.P. DMX, LOL. Lots of love. Dogs bite, dogs fight, dogs knife. What? Scratch, shake, and hold all night. What? So when you hear the arr, arr, start running. Because when you hear the arr, arr, I'm coming. Regular rapping, you must choose one. How would you describe that? Well, I guess I would suppose that might be some wrecking due to the dog barks. Woof, woof. Though there were a couple rhymes of raps. Wrecking is my final answer. Now, please take a moment to subscribe or follow the channel. Alex, what's wrecking your week? Brr, brr, brr. Since Alex is not here, I'm providing my own wreck of the week. My week was wrecked by ants. I planted 12 grapevines this week, and since I neither have the time or physical ability to do it all in one go, I worked in stages. One day I dug the holes. Later I got the soil and mulch, then waited for the grapes to be delivered. While planting, I learned the dirt I dug up had grown ants in it, and they were not happy about me disturbing their pile. After the grapes were planted, I put mulch on top of the soil. It turned out ants had made home in the bag of mulch and were pouring out. They left me with lots of bites that blistered. On the bright side, it feels good to scratch the bites. So thank you, ants. And while we're on Alex's Wreck of the Week and fixing our issues like ant bites, let's get back into Marcus Aurelius's Stoic Meditations. This is number 2. From what they say, and I remember of my natural father, integrity and manliness. And I was taught in the army that integrity means doing what is right when no one is watching. And manliness, of course, would be getting a bunch of ant bites and dealing with it. Because, that's what men do. I did some air quotes there. It's debatable if that's what men do, deal with it. I think they do, because that is also part of Stoicism, to just deal with your problems. What is, and what will be. And we can only roll with the punches. Now, what's happening this week in history, Flizzo? Well, since Flizzo's not here, I'll answer. St. Augustine of Hippo was born on November 13th, 354 AD. He was a bishop and church father, born in what is today Algeria, but then part of the Roman Empire. Here's a quote from his book, Confessions. Great art thou, O Lord, and greatly to be praised. Great thy power, and of thy wisdom there is no number, and man desire to praise thee. He is but a tiny part of all that thou hast created. He bears about him his mortality, the evidence of his sinfulness, and the evidence that thou dost resist the proud. Yet this tiny part of all that thou hast created desires to praise thee. End of reading. I like that. Well, one, that God does resist the proud, which pride is a deadly sin, but the idea that man is but a tiny bit of what God has created, which is what the scientific minds sort of like to believe anyway, that we are just dust. But that's so the scientific minds would say it's more like space dust, because in the Bible, which we're going to get into while I'm speaking of God, the Bible will say that man is made from dust and to dust he will return. But the scientific mind is more like space dust, that there was explosions from stars collapsing, but also the Big Bang, and then enough mass gathers together and creates new elements, and eventually you get to humans. I don't buy into all that, mostly because I always say the word. There's no other examples of speech, so there's no reason to think that this just happened. I will be reading Jacob and Esau Part 2 this week, where the exciting conclusion to what happened last time. You may remember that Esau had sold his birthright to Jacob for a cup of porridge. And this time around, Jacob is going to steal Esau's blessing. Here is Genesis 27. And it came to pass that when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see, he called Esau his eldest son, and said unto him, My son. And he said unto him, Behold, here am I. And he said, Behold, I am old, I know not the day of my death. Now, therefore, take, I pray thee, thy weapons, thy quiver, and thy bow, and go out to the field, and take me some venison, and make me savory meat, such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die. Now Rebekah, Isaac's wife, heard this, and she prefers Jacob, so she devised a plan for Jacob to get the blessing. She says to Jacob, now, therefore, my son, obey my voice according to that which I command thee. Go now to the flock, and fetch me from thence 2 good kids of the goats, and I will make them savory meat for thy father, such as he loveth. And thou shalt bring it to thy father, that he may eat, and that he may bless thee before his death. But Jacob is concerned because Esau is Hebrew for hairy. So when Esau was born, he was hairy, and he is a hairy man. But her plan for that, she says, put the skins of the kids of the goats upon his hands and upon the smooth of his neck. So he did that. Jacob approaches his father with the savory meat, and Isaac is unsure. And Jacob went near unto Isaac his father, and he felt him, and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So he was successfully tricked, and he's going to give Jacob the blessing. This is the blessing. Therefore, God give thee of the dew of heaven, and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blessed thee. So then Jacob scurries off before Esau comes back, but when Esau does, Isaac is confused because he had already given the blessing to Esau. So this will be Isaac speaking to Esau. And he said, thy brother came with subtlety, and hath taken away thy blessing. And he said, is not he rightly named Jacob? For he hath supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he hath taken away my blessing. And he said, hast thou not reserved a blessing for me? And Isaac answered and said unto Esau, behold, I have made him thy lord, and all his brethren have I given to him for servants, and with corn and wine have I sustained him. And what shall I do unto thee, my son? And Esau said unto his father, hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me even also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. This is the word of the Lord. Now for Ben's section, I was going to ask, is Feodor your favorite fighter? Because I've seen that in the past, the Ben rooting for him. I myself am a Muay Thai guy. Senchai and Bukao are 2 legendary fighters. But with Feodor, I thought the best fighter shouldn't be pretty. He should have some fat and scars. World's strongest man, Mariusz Pudzianowski, was lean with visible abs after his many wins of the World's Strongest Man competition. But I later found out that his majority of his competition was banned from competing at that time. So he had that extra energy to lose weight and to look good. But if he had to be winning at all cost, most likely he would have stayed fat and scarred. Speaking of, all the medals from the Paris Olympics should have an asterisk because Russia wasn't allowed to compete. And now I'll be talking about how industries change over time or die out because the world around them changed. Examples I have are combat sports, movie stars, and universities struggling with AI. So first off, with the combat sports, the UFC was supposed to be about crazy fight ideas like one giant versus multiple small people. But in seeking validation or credibility, they have to agree on rules they won't break. And winning by points in a combat sport is not entertaining. Mike Tyson said, you have to win spectacularly. The entertainment industry has changed since personalities have an act. When they make an appearance, they do their act. With social media and streaming, an act isn't enough. You're funny for 1 hour. I still got 23 hours to fill. And that's why people now see through celebrities, because they can't keep up that persona all the time. And they're now beginning to realize they were fake. Who would have thought a celebrity fake? For schools, papers are now written by AI. If a test or homework is through a computer, students will use AI to solve it. And teachers are using AI to grade the assignments that AI completed. So that's the problem with schools. Now, I'll be moving on to the book of 50 philosophy ideas you really need to know. I'm on idea number 5, reason and experience. How do we come to know things? Is it primarily through use of reason that we acquire knowledge, or does experience gained through our senses play the most significant role in the way we get to know the world? Much of the history of Western philosophy has been colored by this basic opposition between reason and experience as the foundational principle of knowledge. So, this is rationalism and empiricism. Those are the two ways of thinking, experience and reason. And empiricism, if we look in the etymology, the history of a word, you might be familiar with empirical units of measure, like a foot or a meter, and that would be experience. So you know a foot is this length, and you can reuse it, and that would be an empirical unit of measure. But there are 3 key distinctions to understand what is at issue between rationalist and empiricist theories of knowledge. The first is a priori versus posteriori. So a priori being before, posteriori being after. So that's also how reason versus experience. If it were reason, then you can think through and discover knowledge of a thing before even experiencing it or encountering it. If it's posteriori, then you have to experience it and learn about it to actually gain that knowledge. Something is knowable a priori if it can be known without reference to experience. That is, without any empirical investigation of how things actually stand in the world. 2 plus 2 equals 4 is known a priori. You do not have to go out into the world to establish its truth. By contrast, if such investigation is needed, something is only knowable a posteriori. So, coal is black, if true, is a posteriori truth. To verify it, you need to look at a lump of coal. Now, here, I'm going to go off on a tangent about Kant, Immanuel Kant, that is. And a lot of people like to think of Kant as smart fodder, I suppose. I've heard a person say, I'm having a Kantian dilemma. And this is where it also, philosophy begins to get into a realm of battle rap, where somebody just threw out the word Kant, and I'm like, well, say some more. You can't just use his name and think that I believe that you know anything about him. Use more of his language and his philosophy before you're going to convince me. Anyway, my tangent on a priori, the 2 plus 2 equals 4 knowledge. Now, Kant taught me in his Critique of Reason, which, if you dare to read, is about 650 pages of very dense writing. Kant taught me in Critique of Reason that 2 plus 2 does not equal 4, that there is no a priori knowledge of 2 and 4. These are terms that humans made up, and we made connections with them because integers don't exist in the real world. They're simplifications of the infinite, and the real world is the infinite. So we make up these numbers so that we can do math with them, that we can measure things, we can then use our reason to figure out how big a room is or the square foot of a room by measuring 2 walls. Here's a quote by Thomas de Quincey. He says, mathematics has not a foot to stand upon, which is not purely metaphysical. And that's what I mean when I'm saying that numbers have no a priori meaning, that it's all metaphysical. It's a game that we humans play together, that math in general, it's all made up. Other examples of integers being used to help simplify the real world. The octave is an example of integers we use because it's comfortable, and colors are the integers of light. Now, I will get off my tangent and back to the three key distinctions in the arguments between reason and experience. This is distinction number 2, analytic versus synthetic. A proposition is analytic if it does not give any more information than is already contained in the meaning of the terms involved. The truth of the statement, all spinsters are unmarried, is apparent merely by virtue of understanding the meaning and relation of the words used. By contrast, the statement, all spinsters are miserable, is synthetic. It brings together or synthesizes different concepts and so provides significant information or misinformation in this case to establish whatever it is true or not. You would have to inquire into the mental state of every unmarried woman. So the reason that analytic is true of the all spinsters are unmarried is that the definition of spinster is unmarried. And then synthetic is having to bring together different ideas, them being miserable. So like it said, you have to ask around. Next distinction, necessary versus contingent. A necessary truth is one that could not be otherwise. It must be true in any circumstance or in all possible worlds. A contingent truth is true, but might not have been if things in the world had been different. For instance, the statement, most boys are naughty, is contingent. It may or may not be true, depending on how the majority of boys actually behave. By contrast, if it is true that all boys are naughty and that Ludwig is a boy, it is necessarily true, in this case as a matter of logic, that Ludwig is naughty. So it mentions logic here, and I had said before that we were going to get into syllogistic logic someday, and that's the type of logic it's talking about. Oftentimes people will say, you're not logical, and that's not, they're not meaning the same logic. They're basically they're using an ad hominem attack to just not agree with somebody when you say they're not logical. But this type of logic is the stuff you will see most common. You'll see it in electricity, electrical drawings, I suppose, how light switches work. If you're going to have multiple light switches in a room, you're going to be using logic to figure out this switch turns on, it does this, goes to the next switch if the first one is turned on. So if then statements are part of syllogistic logic. So if the first switch is on and the second one is on, then the third one isn't necessary or something like that. But there's a whole books and books written on syllogistic logic, but this also gets used in computer science is probably the most popular nowadays, or the newest way that people use logic and used in programming. An if-then statement is part of computer programming. And there's others like but, or, whereas. Other versions of other uses of syllogistic logic would be in geometry. So that's where we go back to our metaphysical math world. Geometry is a made-up world where everything is a nice clean integer. But through that game, geometry, we're able to write more logic rules. So you can measure the degrees on something, and then there's a lot of steps you can follow to find that this angle is actually equal to this angle over here based on these logical rules. And then, of course, logic gets used in law. If then statements like if you drive your car into a wall, then the punishment is 5 years in jail. Throw the book at him, I say. That's about all I have. So now we're going to do 24. The numbers are 7, 3, 2, 3. Now it's a shame that we don't have Alex here because, of course, we're away from the 6 times 4 numbers. And this one gave me a little bit of trouble for a while because the answer involves, or at least the answer I use, involves 9 times 3. Do you know what 9 times 3 is? Quick. Huh? Anyone? No, 9 times 3, 27. And that is such a rough, brutal number that we don't go to it like we do 6 times 4. Anyway, 7 plus 2 equals 9. 9 times 3 equals 27. 27 minus 3 equals 24. And that's all I've got for you today, kids. I hope you've learned something. My final thoughts this week: this is your world. Don't let anyone take it away from you. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a nice day. Goodbye. Deuces. Adios. Vaya con Dios. Check out Mama of 3 Boutique on Etsy for all your Philly Pride needs. Use promo code WRECKING to save 10%. Find Flizzo on Instagram, that's PHLIZO. Follow Alex on Google Maps. All links in the description. My website, drawingmylifeaway.com.